We have three adaptive strategies that are based on food production, and three across non-industrial societies. If we count industrial and post-industrial as adaptive strategies, I mean, they are also based on agriculture, but there's some fundamentally different kinds of patterns that we see with what we call industrial agriculture and more what we would consider subsistence agriculture. And so those three adaptive strategies are horticulture, agriculture, and pastoralism. Horticulture is defined as non-industrial plant cultivation with fallowing. Horticulturalists use simple tools. We're talking about handheld digging sticks and hoes. The fields are not permanently cultivated. This fallow period may vary in length, but may last for months or even several years. Horticulturalists, at least in the tropics, engage in what we call slash and burn cultivation. This is where they clear a plot of its forest growth, then they burn it, then they till the ashes into the soil. What this does is temporarily enriches the soil so that they're able to get high productivity really right away. And so ashes are really, really high in nitrogen, which is one of the primary components of even commercially available chemical fertilizers. So this kind of work of burning and then tilling those ashes in really does a lot to boost productivity of garden plots. It's also characterized by what we would call shifting cultivation, which means that you're not continuously cultivating the same plot of land. What you're doing is moving between several plots of land based on how covered they are, what their soil productivity is. And so these fallow periods, the forest is able to reclaim them. And they are able to kind of the growth, the regrowth of brush and of trees is encouraged because that gives you then more that you'll be able to slash and burn until into the soil the next time. Agriculture, by contrast, involves continuous cultivation of land and continuous use of labor. Horticulturalists have kind of down periods where they don't have to do quite as much work, where it's not really part of the growing season, where they may rely some on both hunting and gathering to supplement their diet. Agriculturalists, by contrast, never really have down seasons. They are continuously laboring to boost their agricultural production. There are three characteristics of agricultural groups. They rely on domesticated animals. These animals are a means of production, not just resources that are produced themselves. And so if you look at the picture on the top right, this is demonstrating the use of domesticated animals as basically a vehicle to pull the plow. Here we're talking about water buffalo that are pulling these plows through these rice fields. And so particularly once we innovate the plow as one of the tools of cultivation, we've got to have something that's strong enough to pull it. And so it might be work that men do because men have higher strength, greater strength than women, or it may be work that's facilitated by the use of livestock. Livestock will pull the plow and trample the fields, kind of tilling in the dirt, mixing the dirt together. Livestock also, as they're walking, tend to poop. So what does that do? Well, that introduces fertilizer into the land that then gets tilled right into the soil as that plow is dragged through it. We see complex irrigation systems used by agriculturalists. This is necessary because they cultivate the same plot year after year. Irrigation is considered a capital investment, particularly when it's done how it has traditionally been done. When we talk about irrigation, we're often using natural water sources. So this can include river water. I mean, this is basically what we have in both the North and South Valley. We've got the acequia system, whereby if you have property that also comes with water rights, you'll be told that there are specific weeks during the year that you are able to open the gate to your ditch. And when you open the ditch, water flows in from the irrigation channel. It may temporarily flood your fields. But when it does so, It's not just purified water. When we think about water that's been in rivers, what else is in it? Well, I mean, one of the big things would be the animals that poop in it. So we're talking about waterfowl, we're talking about fish, we're talking about any birds or mammals that might come down to drink from the river. And that poop then serves as a natural fertilizer. I mean, you can buy something from places like the Home Depot or some of the nurseries in town called fish emulsion. And if you're buying organic fish emulsion, you're talking about something that's $30, $40 a bottle. And fish emulsion is basically just the gunk that comes out of a pond or a river, that stuff you don't really like to step in. It's a mixture of fish poop and decaying plant material, and that's a wonderful fertilizer both for small scale gardening as well as larger scale agriculture if you can do it. And so because you're introducing poop and decomposing plant material, you are introducing microorganisms, you are introducing organic matter, you are boosting soil productivity. The longer that you do that, the higher your productivity will become. And so this is why agriculture and irrigation systems represent a capital investment. The Ifugao of the Philippines use canals from rivers, streams, springs, and ponds, even now today in their traditional rice farming. The third feature of agricultural populations that we don't find among horticultural ones is the use of terracing. Terracing happens when you build kind of a system of steps into the side of a mountain. And when you think about agricultural mountainsides, if you don't terrace, what's going to happen? Well, the very first time that there's rainfall, the side of the mountain is going to erode. You're going to get a mudslide, a landslide, etc., and you're going to lose most of your agricultural production in the event of a mudslide or landslide. So when you build terraces, you're kind of building this network of stair steps. You are creating a flat, horizontal kind of field over vertical relief, so that the little wall you build to retain both the plant growth and the soil serves as kind of a buffering, and it keeps the crops themselves from washing down the mountainside. The labor to build and maintain terraces is ginormous, though. I mean, we're talking about um, really needing like slave labor to be able to build some of these large scale terraced agricultural fields. You need to have an expendable labor source that's willing to work long, hard hours, both to create and maintain. Agriculture has some costs and benefits associated with it. On the plus side, the long term yield per area is far greater and more dependent. That does not mean that the day to day returns are better for agriculture. Horticulturalists do just fine, particularly when population density is low. However, once population density jumps up to a certain point, then it no longer is conducive to engage in horticulture. You've got to make this shift over to agriculture. Rural societies tend to be more densely populated than horticultural ones. In reality, we've got flexibility as to where groups fall along this continuum. And so we've got intermediate economies that may combine some aspects of both horticulture and agriculture. The big defining feature is that horticulture always has a fallow period. The fallow period doesn't have to be of similar length, but it's got to be present. If there is no fallow period present, then regardless of what kind of tools, whether you've got domesticated animals, whether you've got terracing involved, we're going to consider you a horticultural society. Until relatively recently, we had intermediate economies that were found in parts of Africa, Southeast Asia, the Pacific Islands, Mexico, Central America, and the South American tropical forest. And even the Ache now are defined more as horticulturalists than they are as hunter-gatherers, because as they've been settled into reservations, they have garden plots that they tend. They also have kind of communal activities that are indicative of more horticultural tribal kind of context. Intensive cultivators tend to be sedentary. We are not going to cultivate if we don't have sedentism. Why? Because you got to be around to utilize the resources that you yourself have grown. Agricultural economies become increasingly specialized. What this means is that they are much more likely to base their diet on either a few caloric staples or even only a single caloric staple. This is essentially what happened across Ireland and much of the British Isles in the late 1800s. There was a potato blight that hit potato field after potato field and caused what is sometimes referred to in the literature as the Irish potato famine. In other sources, it's referred to as the quote unquote Great Famine. But what this did was decimated the potato crops. And, this disease that came through, this potato blight, wasn't something that people necessarily had control over. But when you base your entire diet on only one or two staples and you have failure in that staple, what happens to your population? Well, they're going to die off. So, we've got to be careful as we move towards agricultural economies because they aren't necessarily sustainable in the long term. You also see only a few animals that are raised. So, you might be a population that only has domesticated water buffalo, for example, to pull the plow through the rice fields. Or you might be a population that widely herds sheep but doesn't bother with goats on top of sheep. Agricultural economies pose a system of regulatory issues that central governments often have arisen to be able to solve. And so, with increasing population density, we are suddenly worried about who our people are and where our people are, and we utilize some dramatic measures to kind of monitor human behavior. And so, these regulatory issues arise out of this greater population density. Pastoralism includes activities focused on domesticated animals such as cattle, sheep, goats, camel, yak, and reindeer. The herders and the flocks have a symbiotic relationship. That is, an obligatory interaction between the groups that's beneficial to each. Herders protect their animals and ensure their reproduction, in turn for food and other products such as leather. So, granted, we're not necessarily seeing widespread eating of livestock among pastoral populations. Rather, the livestock are being raised for ritual purposes, also being milked and bled. So we would nick their jugular and make some blood sausage or blood porridge, for example. And the milk is really self-explanatory. There is also the direct use of animals for food. The nomadic pastoralists, those that move across the continent over the course of the year, are much more reliant upon kind of trade that they're able to foster with neighboring horticultural groups. If you are nomadic, you of course can't farm or garden yourself, so you have to supplement your diet with hunting, gathering, fishing, cultivating, or trading, or, well, not the cultivating part. There is another type of movement that comes with pastoralism called transhumance that we'll talk about in just a second, but in these contexts, then you've got people who stay at home when you go out to move your livestock. Pastoralism was confined to the Old World until Europeans brought domesticated animals to the New World. And so if we ask why that was, well, if you recall back as to why agriculture had a slower emergence, and the emergence of agricultural states happened kind of on a different pace, a lot of that has to do, remember, this advent of agriculture, with the prevalence of species that are large enough to make it worth your while and also docile enough to allow you to domesticate them. And so this limited the suite of resources that were available to South American farmers to basically guinea pigs, capybaras, and cats. So these two patterns of movement of pastoralists include nomadism, where the entire group moves with the animals throughout the year, and transhumance, where only part of the group moves with the animals throughout the year. The rest of the group stays back in home villages. And what we get then are at the home village periodic festivals that celebrate whatever it is that we heard in terms of making a living. And so the picture on the right represents nomadic pastoralists who are moving the entire herd, all of their goats, all of their camels. The picture on the left demonstrates one of these transhumant populations. So here we've got a village somewhere in the mountains of Europe, probably someplace like the Alps, and twice a year when the sheep are being moved up or down the hill, up or down the mountain from the valley to the top, we're going to have festivals that emerge that center around sheep. So I've got a friend who had done his degree here at UNM and then moved back home to Italy. He was an exchange student, a foreign exchange student. And he would send pictures during his village's annual sheep festival because the streets would literally be filled with sheep. And so this idea of transhumance, and the reason that it's facilitated by elevation gain is because you've got colder, wetter areas like the high plateau, where you're going to be able to herd your animals, to have enough food for your animals during the wintertime. And then during nicer seasons, so like during the summer, you'll send them down. You'll herd your animals down into the valley where the village may be in order to take advantage of less lush summer grasses. So it's seasonal movement of generally some boys and young men who then will tend the herds. The people who stay behind in the village are able to cultivate and able to kind of create cash crops that they can use to grow their own crops during other times of the year. And so this table just summarizes the adaptive strategies as put forth by Cohen. We've got foraging, also known as hunter-gathering, where you rely on natural resources, and you've got a high degree of mobility, both spatially and temporally. We've got horticulture, where you rely on slash and burn, shifting cultivation. We've got two kinds of horticulture. We've got Swidden horticulture, which is the tropical kind of slash and burn use, where the forest will regrow during the fallow periods. We also have what's called dryland farming, which is more of what like the ancestral Puebloans did here historically. What dry farming is when you plant several, you've got very, very dry conditions, not a lot of moisture in the air, not a lot of rainfall. So you you try out farming either the same resources in multiple locations or even slightly different resources across multiple locations. That way, if there is a micro weather event that happens, say a wildfire steams through or something, that you've got areas to fall back on so that a single climatic event will not really overall affect your production all that much. You've got other areas where you were successful, where you were able to still hold on to resources. We've got agriculture, which is intensive farming. It includes the continuous use of land and the continuous use of labor. We've got pastoralism, which is animal herding. This includes two patterns of movement, that of nomadism and that of transhumance. And then we've got industrialism. Industrialism refers to the industrial production of goods. It often occurs in factories. It's associated with capitalism and also as an alternative scheme, socialism.